Hi, I'm Charlotte Stirling-Reed, Registered Nutritionist, and I'm here at Zebedees headquarters to give a webinar today all about nursery food guidelines and the changes that are happening this September. So I really hope you join us and I hope you enjoy it. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is a webinar that I'm hosting on behalf of Zebedees, who run these webinars really regularly. So if you have not seen some of our previous webinars, make sure you go and check them out on YouTube. We've done webinars on things like portion sizes, on things like nutrition guidelines, on things like fussy eating and food refusal. So really useful, supportive topics for parents or early years staff. So make sure you do check those out. And today we are going to be talking about supporting nurseries to meet the new EYFS nutrition guidance for early years settings. So we're going to be talking a little bit about what that means, about what the changes are and how it varies compared to the old guidance. And we're going to be talking about what Zebedees are doing here to make sure that they are compliant with the new menu recommendations as well. So I am going to first of all, let me just check that I can move forward. Yep. First of all, I'm going to introduce myself. So for those of you who have never seen me before, my name is Charlotte Stirling-Reed. I'm a registered nutritionist and I'm also the nutrition consultant for Zebedees. So I've been working with Zebedees for a long time now, probably about 4 years, and I work with them to help develop their menus, to make sure their menus are meeting government recommendations and criteria. I work with them to help support education for early years staff as well as for parents. I help them with blogs, with writing, with content, and just basically provide an advisory role for them. Now, they haven't asked me to say this, but I always like to say I am very proud to work with Zebedees. They are an incredible company, and being someone who works with lots of different companies and organisations, Zebedees are so easy because they want to do the right thing. They are really easy to adapt and change what they offer. And yeah, it's just been a really great partnership and I'm very proud to be a part of it. So a little bit of background on me. I have an undergraduate and postgraduate degree in nutrition. I also trained within the NHS and I have been working as a freelancer for a long time, and I actually have 4 books on the topic of feeding babies, toddlers, children and young families. So just so you know, I'm very much a good authority to talk about child nutrition and the new guidelines. I also was actually involved in the consultation process for these new nursery guidelines. So we're very much in the thick of it when they first came out, and was helping to advise them on the changes that they were making. So I knew what was happening and I knew it was coming, and it's actually a very exciting time, which you'll probably hear from me, and hopefully you'll understand when I talk about this now. So the next thing I want to talk about is the new guidance and why it matters. Now, I am obviously a child nutritionist. I specialise in this field and I care a lot about child nutrition. It's one of the reasons why I trained in nutrition and then decided to specialise in paediatric and child nutrition. Now, the last guidelines that we had were in 2017, and actually a lot has changed since then in terms of child nutrition research and research around food and our health in general. So we know a lot more. We also know a lot more about what we call the first 1,000 days of life, which is essentially the time from a pregnancy right up until a child's 2nd birthday. Now, there's a huge amount of research on this area. And we know that what children are eating during this time is really important, not just for the here and now, not just for their dental health, their behaviour, their growth, but actually for their long-term health, for their future health, for their brain development, for their risk of diseases, for their education attainment when they get older. So we know that what we feed young children really matters. And for me, that is why these guidelines were so important to be updated and put into place, because we need to be making sure that what children are eating is beneficial for their long-term health. And I really care about this topic so much. It's exactly why I work in this field. Now, One of the other reasons why it's important that these guidelines have been updated is that many nurseries are still really unclear on what the old guidance were. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence, and some that the government have brought out recently, suggesting that actually a lot of nurseries weren't necessarily following the old guidance. They found it a bit overwhelming. Some people didn't even know that there were guidelines for nurseries. So it's really important that we bring this to the forefront, that we say we've got new guidance, and guess what? It's going to really support you. It's going to help nurseries, and we need to see some changes so that nurseries are offering really great food to children. Another reason for this is that for some children, not all by any means, but some children might be having from 8 till 6, from Monday to Friday, almost 90% of their meals eaten within a nursery setting. Now, as I said, of course, that is not all children. But for those children who are having 90% of their meals from nursery, they really need to be making sure that they are helping children to meet their full potential, that they are providing them with the balance of nutrients that children need to grow and develop and be healthy. There's no point in children coming into a setting Monday to Friday and being given food that is not actually going to be beneficial for them, because then those evening meals or those weekends aren't going to top up enough to make sure that children are actually getting what they need. So that is why it's absolutely critical that we get the nutrition offered at nursery right. Another reason why this new guidance really matters is we can help to reduce health inequalities by making sure that children at a nursery setting, whatever their background, wherever they live, whatever their parents' financial status, that they have opportunity again to eat and consume and have access to healthy, balanced food and nutrition. It's so important to make sure that we can help reduce those health inequalities by offering a really high standard of good nutrition within nurseries. And lastly, and this is important for all of us, in a nursery setting, children are there to learn, to develop, to reach key milestones, to grow and to really flourish. And we take safety and the health of children into account. But actually, until now, we haven't really taken account that much of their nutrition. And for me, this is something that is so important. Part of caring for, part of helping to grow healthy children, or actually a large part of it, is the food and nutrition that they get. And up until now, we haven't really been paying that much attention. This last few months, the government have really drilled down on early years and have shown how important they feel it is. And it's exactly the same in nursery. If we're trying to nourish healthy children, help them grow and develop, we should absolutely be focusing on the food that they are eating too. So hopefully I've highlighted to you guys why this matters. Why do we need these new guidance? Why should they be there? And why should we, as nursery providers or childminders or early years settings, why should we be paying attention to them? Hopefully what I've just talked about has really shown that. So I'm going to move on a little bit to talk about what these guidance are. So this new guidance is part of the early years foundation stage. So early years foundation stage framework sets the framework for what we need to do as early years settings and nursery providers and childminders to make sure that we are following regulations to help keep children safe and protected. What we now have is new early years nutrition guidance, which is actually part of the framework of the early years foundation stage. Now, prior to this being here, what we had was that the EYFS document said something along the lines of children where they are provided with meals and snacks, they need to be healthy, balanced and nutritious. What we are now trying to do and what the government are trying to do is explain what we actually mean by healthy, balanced and nutritious. So the whole point in these brand new government guidelines, which are meant to be being rolled out from September 2025, so right now, is to try and help to explain to anybody working in an early year setting what we mean by healthy, balanced and nutritious. And I'm going to talk you through some of that today. We know from, again, anecdotal evidence that around about 80% of nurseries aren't really following the guidance. We really need to be making sure that we up that a little bit, again, because of all of the reasons that I said earlier. So what are the changes that we can see to some of the nursery guidance? Well, what we now know is that the guidance is no longer voluntary, because in the EYFS nutrition guidance, it says that providers must take this guidance into account and should follow it unless there is a good reason not to. So what that says to us is that we definitely must be following this guidance unless there is a really good reason why, as settings, we cannot do that. What this guidance does, and I'd massively recommend anybody who hasn't taken a look at it does take a look at it, because it's got a huge amount of information, but it actually has a really clear table as well that lays out what the expectations are, which I will go over in a minute. But what this guidance does is it sets much clearer explanations and expectations within these. And I think that's really important, because the last document is very big. So the document from 2017, which had not been updated for a long time, has now been updated, and it's a lot clearer. So we can understand a bit more what the expectations are from nurseries. There's a lot of clarification. So just as an example, the last guidance talked a lot about things like avoiding processed foods, whereas now we have more specific guidance. It talks about things like cakes, sweets, savoury pastries, biscuits, crisps, chocolate and confectionery not being offered within nursery settings. So again, much clearer than just saying avoid processed foods or avoid sugary foods, for example. We also have things, for example, that the new guidance states that breakfast cereals need to be low sugar or have a green traffic light label on them for sugar. So again, much clearer, much more specific stipulations. And again, all of this is within the guidance. I'm just highlighting some of those pieces that have really helped to show that clarity. We've also seen, and this is one of the aspects of it that I find really interesting, but I know it's a little bit controversial, which is the changes to the meal structure. So we've seen it move from a fairly typical kind of main meal and then pudding structure to the new guidance is suggesting a different way of serving meals. And now we're looking at, for example, having a main meal, but alongside that, either a starter or a side or a second course. This, for me, is one of the most important aspects of it, and I'm really happy to see, and we can of course talk about it towards the end if any of you have any questions, but I'm really, really pleased to see this, because actually in the previous guidance there was lots of menu plans, and in those menu plans there was often a main and a pudding that was recommended. And we know that actually, children don't necessarily need to be having a pudding every single day or twice a day. And also sometimes that was interpreted as offering quite a sweet or sugary pudding. And again, young children are often having very high intakes of sugar. So we don't really need to be having government guidelines which recommend a pudding every single day. It's not to say they cannot have pudding, but those puddings, if they are offered, or those second courses, ideally need to be something like milk, something like a dairy, a yogurt and some fruit. And the new meal structure where you've got a starter, a side or a second course allows for lots of flexibility in that. It means that there's much less of a focus on sweet puddings, which was often what was being offered a lot at nurseries. And again, we can come back and talk about that later. There's also a lot more limits on processed foods, salt and sugars. So I've already mentioned some of them. For example, the limit on pastries. There's also limits on things like not just processed meats, but also plant-based processed foods. So quite often with nurseries, if they are offering vegetarian or vegan alternatives, they might turn to some plant-based products, and they might end up using them every day. And they can be quite high in salt. So the new guidance also sets limits on how often we are using some of those plant-based products, as well as other things like processed meats and processed salt and sugary foods. The other positive thing about the new guidance is that there is a lot more on inclusivity and the diversity of diets. And I think this is really great, because a lot of nurseries are already doing this and doing fantastic jobs. But the new government guidelines are really highlighting how we want to try and be really inclusive within these menus. It actually has a section on meeting the needs of all children, and it has a section on food for religious faiths and beliefs. And this means that there is a lot more advice information. And if you have a look at the menu plan, it's gone from a meal plan where it sets out the kind of snacks and breakfast and lunch that can be offered each day. And it more now gives examples. And a lot of those examples do take some of those kind of religious beliefs or some of the eating restrictions into account. One of the benefits of Zebedees is also that it often takes into account things like allergy needs as well as diversification of the diet, and also offers such a wide variety. So it's one of the reasons why for nurseries it can be beneficial to have somebody offering you the meals that already ticks all of those boxes. Okay, so lastly, to talk about the new guidance, what they are doing is the new guidance has a huge array of external resources that can offer you or staff a helping hand in some really, really tricky topics. So the EYFS is now talking a lot more about the meals that should be served. So not necessarily within the nutrition guidance, but they talk about things like choking risk and safety and how food should be served within the environment. And there's some really great resources from the Food Standards Agency and the Department for Education. There's been a whole resource created looking at things like choking risk foods, food safety, and also focusing a lot on allergens and how to be going about offering allergens in your setting too. So although that's not actually included within the bulk of the document, there are lots of external resources which are really, really helpful. Just lastly, to follow on from this, the guidance is also very great in terms of the beginning of the document contains a lot of information about things like weaning and the different ages and stages of young children and what they can and can't be offered. So do check it out if you haven't already, but that's just a bit of a summary about what we can actually see. Now, what I'm going to move on to talk about now is what you actually need to do. So in order to meet the guidance, in order to meet the balance and the nutrition that is recommended within these new guidance, I'm going to talk through each of the meal occasions. But before I do that, there is a whole table in the new guidance called Table 2, Food and Drink Guidance. And what this does is it breaks down the guidance into each food group. So you've got fruits and vegetables, starchy foods, protein and iron-rich foods, dairy foods, and drinks within the guidance. And it stipulates what needs to be offered, what needs to be limited, and what needs to be avoided. So it's provided, limited, and avoided. And again, this is a really clear way of showing what you can and can't do within each food group. So just as an example, with the fruit and vegetable aspect, so fruit and veg is recommended to be provided at each main meal and as most snacks. It's recommended to limit things, for example, dried fruit should not be offered in between meal times and should only be offered within a meal because of the impact dried fruit can have on the teeth. And then in terms of avoid, it talks about things like avoiding any fruits that have added sugars or sugars added to them. So you've got a provided, a limit, and an avoid for each category of food group. It makes it really easy and it makes it really clear. There's also a section on drinks and also food for all. And the food for all section talks essentially about limiting the processed foods and the salt, sugar, and saturated fat across the entirety of the menu. So what I'm going to talk about now is just looking at each meal occasion, just as a different way of looking at some of these guidelines, so you can see what the expectations are for you as a nursery setting. So for example, as with the older guidance, breakfast is recommended to include a portion of starchy food and at least one portion of fruits and or vegetables. Ideally, the dairy recommendation is to have 3 portions of dairy throughout the day, including what children will have at home. But for most settings, you'll probably be offering some form of dairy in the morning as well, whether it be something with cereal or some yogurt, milk with cereal or some yogurt. There is also, as I already mentioned, more stipulation about things like the breakfast cereals that are on offer. Previously, there wasn't really much of a recommendation about what cereals should be offered, and now the guidance are saying specifically to be offering low sugar breakfast cereals within early years settings. The next thing is talking about snacks. Now, the guidance actually goes into quite a lot of detail about snacks, whereas it was a little bit more vague last time round. It talks about having fruits and vegetables offered as snacks, and it gives examples. It also talks about having a starchy food as part of at least one snack a day to try and add some balance into those snacks as well. It also talks, and I love this, about having no crisps, biscuits, cakes, sugary snacks, and limits on things like dried fruits as snacks as well during the day. So again, a little bit more in-depth advice on what those snacks should look like. And of course, there are some examples in the guidance too. When it comes to lunch, so again, really similar to the old guidance, we're still recommending having a starchy food, a protein, and at least one portion of fruits and vegetables with lunchtime as well. There is this change to the meal structure. So instead of it being a main and a second course, or a main and a pudding, it's now giving you as the nursery setting the option whether you could have something like a starter. And that might be something like a soup, a salad, or it might be some vegetable sticks before you kick off the meal. Or a side dish. So that might be having something like a salad that children can help themselves to and put on the side of their plate along with their main meal. Or it could be a second course. And this might be, a pudding, or it might be something like fruit or yogurt, or it might be something like cheese and crackers, or it might be a savoury option. So it gives flexibility. It also offers 2 different eating occasions, so a starter or a main or a side, so that young children, if they don't eat the main meal, they have another option alongside that mealtime. And I think that's a really important element of this new plan. And it also doesn't mean that you have to offer a starter, a main and a side every meal. It doesn't mean that you can only offer one or the other. You can vary it and change up what you offer. And that, of course, increases variety, which is always good. And then, like I say, there's a real focus as well, drink-wise, on things like water and milk being the only fluids that little ones need in early years too. So afternoon snack, this is recommended the same as the early morning snack. So again, a fruit or vegetable or starchy food at least once a day. Again, restricting to make sure that we're not offering biscuits or sweets or chocolate or confectionery during this time, and also water or milk to drink. Last but not least, the tea menu. So this is the same recommendation that it is really for lunch, which is a slightly smaller but balanced meal, including starchy food, protein, and at least one portion of fruits or veggies. And then it's recommended, again, the same as before. You can also offer that alongside a starter, a side, or a second dish. And this is, this is to be included to try and, again, increase that variety and give plenty of opportunities and eating occasions for little ones. So that's, in a nutshell, what the guidance are at the moment. Now, what I would say is it's really important to go and take a look at that table too, because that really goes into a lot of detail about these, and you can see in there again what is to be offered, what is to be limited, and what is to be avoided. So it will really help you. But I've just tried to break it down there into meal occasions to make it that little bit easier. So if you are a nursery setting and you are thinking, oh my goodness, where do I even start? The first thing I would say is go and have a look at the guidance. They're really easily available online. At Zebedees, we've already sent out plenty of information about them, but we can, of course, send them to you again if you would like us to email you them. The first thing I'd recommend any nursery settings do is to go and have a look at the menus. Have a look at them. Maybe print off the new guidance alongside your current menu and just have a look. Use it as like a tick box exercise and see if you think that your menus are meeting that current criteria. Familiarise yourself with the new guidance so you know roughly what to expect. Of course, if you guys have a nursery who is provided by Zebedees, we've already done the hard work for you, so you don't need to worry about it. But it's still useful for you to be familiar with the guidance and how foods are supposed to be served too. The next thing I would recommend is, if you're looking at your menus, just make sure that you do have a balance of food groups at those meal occasions, that there's plenty of fruit and veg on offer, and of course that there is plenty of variety across the menu. Variety is so key for little ones. It's very easy to offer things like, it might be pizza, and then it might be sausages and mash, and then it might be beans on toast one meal. And if the children are having that every day, they're going to get very used to it, and those will become very familiar. But the more variety you add to the menu, the more that you're adding in something like spaghetti bolognese, or it might be a curry, or it might be a Mexican dish, the more that you add that variety into the menu, the more your little ones will get used to having a variety, and you'll actually end up with less children refusing meal times. It might sound counterintuitive, but it really does make a difference. So have a look at those meal times, make sure you're balancing those meals out. Number 3, try and have a think about those menu plans and the meal structures. Also, really have a look and address those puddings, because actually puddings on the menu have been something that parents have been speaking to me about for years and years, and it's something that the government are obviously trying to crack down on a little bit too. Number 4, we really need to be focusing on reducing processed meats, fried foods and processed meat alternatives, something that these new guidelines have really honed in. So have a look at how often you are offering them. Things like sausages or Quorn or processed kind of soya mince are all things that we need to be, they can be included on the menu, but there are limitations. So check them out and check out how often you are offering them. Now 4 and 5 are really, really key aspects. We really want to see a written food policy. Now, I could talk about food policies all day because it really helps. It helps you so much as a nursery setting to have a nice level playing field. Whenever a parent starts, you can say, here is our food policy. And if in your food policy, you've got the government guidance, you've got guidance around what should be on offer for lunch boxes, what parents can and can't bring in, what your policy is around celebration foods, what your policy is around bringing other food from home, what your mealtime environment looks like. If you can have it all written down in one document, it can be super helpful for you as a setting. It takes the pressure off you every day, and it means that you are quite literally working off a level playing field. When I work with nurseries, I often recommend to them to try and make sure that you have one person in your setting who is in charge of a food policy or who has their nutrition and health hat on. And they can then be in charge of knowing all of the ins and outs, helping to write that food policy and answering parents' questions. Because communicating with parents around food policy, changes in the guidance and why you're doing it can be really helpful to make sure that you get your message across and you get those parents on board. I'm sure we'll have more questions on that later, but for me, a food policy that is really well written is a really, really positive step, and I would hugely recommend any nurseries do it. So I'm just going to go over these next 2 slides fairly quickly, but when you're planning meals across the day and when you're planning your menus and looking at them, I would really think about some of these things. I've talked about some of them already. So those food groups, making sure you tick them off. The reason for the food groups, starchy foods, fruits and vegetables, dairy foods and protein-rich foods is because if you're offering a variety of those, it means that children are getting access to all of the nutrition, apart from vitamin D, that they need throughout the day. Variety, as I said, the more variety you offer, the more children are going to accept a variety later on, especially if you get those new starters come in and they get used to these diverse and varied menus. You'll find that actually it reduces food refusal in the long run. Choosing plain and unsweetened options for things like yogurts or fruits or other foods that you have on offer where possible. Plain is really, really key in the sense that it means no added sugar and ideally no added salt. Also, avoid those mealtime pressures. Now, one thing I don't think is talked about enough in the guidance, there is a little bit in there about it, but is those mealtime environments. You can get information on this elsewhere, and actually at Zebedees we've talked a lot. I did a webinar for them on the mealtime environments and creating that kind of happy mealtime. Really key. If you want children to want to be at that mealtime and also make your job easier, it's about taking the pressure off mealtimes, making them enjoyable and making little ones want to be there. And of course, last but not least, do rely on caterers like Zebedees to do a good job for you. If you have a catering company who can offer the foods to your nursery setting that you know ticks all the boxes, delivers on allergens and helps to keep you within a certain budget, Zebedees are already doing the job for you, and it can be such a lot of pressure off of you as an individual setting. So I am going to move on now to Nadia from Zebedees, who's going to come and talk about what Zebedees have done, the tweaks that Zebedees have made to their current menus, so that you can see what we're doing here to make sure we are in line with the new government guidance. Welcome.
Thank you.
Nadia.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Right. Well, the good thing is that I don't have too much to say because we're already most of the way there with our menus. So we've made a few minor tweaks to the next menu, which starts on the 13th of October. So that includes things like removing some of the items that are mentioned in the new guidance. One of them is the savoury pastry. So that was always a feature of our tea menu before. So nurseries that are using this at the moment will know that we've actually taken that off this current menu and replaced it with a similar item, which is a flatbread. And so the pinwheels won't feature on the menus in the future. We've also already, ahead of this, we removed ice cream from our menu. Obviously, very popular with nurseries and children, but it contains added sugar. And even though we were in the past using a product that was a reduced sugar item, it's not suitable anymore. So that's come off our menu. We've also done some work in the past on our yogurts. So we make our own yogurts here using natural yogurt and a variety of fruit preparations. On the next menu, we're introducing a Greek-style yogurt, which it's lovely. It's really thick texture, smooth, creamy, maybe not quite as tart as a regular natural yogurt, so we're hoping the children will enjoy that. And our dairy-free yogurts, these are also homemade now, and we're now fortifying those ourselves.
Amazing.
So that's something brand new that we're doing. That means that we don't have to outsource to another supplier. We're more in control of our allergens, and we're not adding sugar or sweeteners. So we feel that that's a really good product for the children that are dairy-free or vegan. We've also removed vanilla sauce from the menu, which was a reduced sugar custard. So that's something, especially on a winter menu, it's quite something we'd serve with a sponge. That's now replaced, and we're serving fruit with vanilla creme fraiche instead. Alongside that, we've also, any of our homemade products, we have products that are made for us, so our breads, sponge mixes or scone mixes, the sausages that we have on our menu, they appear just once in 3 weeks. Those products are made for us, and in that way we can control things like salt, sugar contents, preservatives. But obviously the majority of our menu is homemade, so we've got a really tight control over all of our ingredients. And we've been able to meet this guidance quite easily because we've already made so much progress anyway. So really, the new menu that comes out on the 13th of October, we're hoping that nursery children will already be familiar with the style of the menu anyway, so no great shocks or people.
And you're giving the option, aren't you, to add to, for nurseries can also choose to have plain yoghurt from Zoo as well, that's right, isn't it?
So our yoghurts, they're made with plain yoghurt and fruit. If we know that some children have issues with texture, so we're going to be trialling on the new menu a Greek-style yoghurt and other plain yoghurts with finely diced fruits. Now, we know that some children struggle with those textures and aren't familiar with them. They're used to smooth yoghurts. So if nurseries want to order a plain yoghurt instead, that's going to be an option, and that's a new feature as well.
Brilliant, love it. Okay, thank you. So just really briefly, and I'm nearly finished now, and we will move on to questions, but I just wanted to talk a little bit about some of the challenges, because obviously, you know, there's never going to be a government guideline update without some challenges coming in. So, you know, things like budgets, totally understand it's always going to be hard in this current environment to try and meet the budgets of a nursery and make sure that these foods are healthy and balanced. But actually, a lot of the government guidance are offering recommendations and meal ideas and recipe ideas that are all on a budget. Also, you know, there's absolutely nothing wrong with things like frozen fruit, tinned fruits, as long as it's not tinned in sugar. So there's always ways you can be a little bit savvy at the supermarket. Allergies are always really tough. It's another reason why it's so important to make sure that you have a food policy in place and that you have really good communications with any families whose little ones are coming to your setting who have allergies. You should really have a care plan for anyone who does come. Also, as I mentioned earlier, the resources within the guidance, there are some really good resources from the Food Standards Agency and the Department of Education that is quite new and updated around allergens and how to tackle that in a nursery setting. So honestly, make sure you check that out. And lastly, fussy eaters. Where I was talking earlier about the mealtime environment, and as I said, I did a webinar for Zebedees all about mealtime environment, and I've done one on fussy eating as well. So for both of those, they will be so helpful to you, but it is really about thinking about that mealtime environment. What do children want to be in? You know, do they want to be sat there with lots of pressure to eat up? Do they want the mealtime environment to be negative, or can we make it quite light, quite pressure-free, and ideally just offer lots and lots of variety so that over time, children will get used to it and enjoy being a part of it. So these are all things that, again, as Zebedees, we address and we try and take into account all the time. And of course, we've done that as well with our webinar. So make sure you do check those out. And of course, if you have any more, then let us know. We're going to move on to question time in a second. So just before we finish, really quick summary. These new nursery guidelines are being rolled out in September. They are stricter than what the last guidelines from 2017 were, and they certainly set more limits, especially around salt, sugar and processed foods. There's also new recommendations on those meal structures, less of a focus on this idea of sweet puddings, and they are expected to be followed unless there is a specific reason why you can't. Zebedees have always been ahead of the game. We've always been making sure we go above and beyond those guidance, and this is no different now. We've made a few tweaks to the menus to ensure we are very much in line with those, and we're really proud of the menus that are going out. It is going to be a bit of a change, and we're obviously always welcome to feedback and your comments too. But now is a really great time to review your guidelines, make changes, and try and make sure that from now we are meeting the new government recommendations. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. So hopefully, here we go. I can pop into the Q&A section. So if any of you guys have any questions, we are really happy to take some. We know that quite a lot of you probably will have questions. So we will, be here to answer your questions for the next 10 minutes or so. Obviously, we've got representative from Zebedees and also myself, who's a nutritionist, but we'd love to really focus these answers and questions on the menus and the new guidance and anything that we can do to help with that. I hope that's all okay. We had some sent in as well, so we might go over some of those questions as well, but, here we are. Okay, you ready?
Yes.
Yeah, let's go. I'll read them out, don't worry. Okay, so we've got one here. Are raisins, dried apricots and dried prunes okay to give alongside cereal? Really good question. Yes, the guidance stipulate they should be not be given alone as a snack. The reason for this is because dried fruit is a really nutrient dense option. I don't want people to be afraid to use it. But on their own, what we know is that dried fruit gets stuck in the teeth and it causes those sugars to stay on the teeth until the next meal time. So that's why it's recommended to be offered alongside meals. And actually at Zebedees, we do have some dried fruit in meals, don't we?
Yeah, it's they're sometimes a feature of our main course dishes, things like dishes like curries. And we pack them full of fruits and vegetables. So, but we don't serve them on their own.
On their own, exactly. Always part of a meal. And so, yes, offering them alongside cereal, on top of cereal is great. I would definitely just encourage children not to be eating them at the end. So don't eat all the cereal and then eat the dried fruits, because then again, it's going to be on their teeth until the next meal time. So we've got one. Will Ofsted mark us down if we don't adhere to the guidance? So Ofsted will be taking these guidelines into account along with the rest of EYFS guidance. Okay, so it will be a part of it. And what I've heard from Ofsted is that what they will be doing is they'll be taking this into account. They'll be working with the nursery. They know it's a work in progress. No one's going to go in there and go, you're not doing this, you're struck off. They're going to be taking it into account. They're going to be looking at it. They're going to be working with the nursery. They're going to be interviewing and asking questions. And as long as they think that you are taking this seriously and you are trying to make changes in line with the government guidance, you'll be absolutely fine. It is going to be work in progress. It is new changes. Some of them are quite tough to kind of interpret.
Yeah. We've got, for nurseries that are using us, if you have an inspection and there are any questions, we've got a document you can download from Zoo, which sets out the government guidance point by point, and next to it you'll see what we're doing to meet those guidelines. So that's available to download on Zoo. If you'd like a copy by email, just drop the team an email and we can send that for you.
Brilliant. Love that. There's one here which is a really good question. What is the advice around children bringing in birthday cakes for their birthday? So there is a section in the guidance called food being brought in from home. It isn't hugely clear about what the government stance is on it, but because in light of the guidance being no added sugars and low sugar on the menu, I'd say that it isn't something that we should be giving to nurseries. It's going to be at the nursery's discretion. I think what a lot of nurseries I know do is they package it up and they give it to a parent and they allow the parent to decide what to do. And I think that would be something that you could do. You could also have on your food policy, this is where your food policy comes into play and can take the pressure off you. If you say in your food policy, please don't bring in these for birthdays. Here's some examples or ideas of other things that you could bring in instead of cake. That's what I've always done with nurseries. And like I say, I think whatever you choose to do, it really should be clear and stipulated on your food policy, so that if a parent queries it, you can say, well, actually, when you joined up with us, you had this food policy and the details and the information are there. But there is a section on out of home. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think in the guidance, it suggests that parents can provide fruit platters as an example.
Yep.
Or maybe something that's not food related even, so bubbles or stickers, colouring, something like that. So you can still celebrate, but it doesn't have to be around a cake.
Around the cake, yeah. And there's lots of reasons for that. I know some people might think that's really strict and unfair, but actually there's a lot of reason for that. In the UK, diets of young children are far too high in sugar at the moment. So, we're trying to make an education environment like a nursery setting somewhere where children learn about food and nutrition, and that balance is really highlighted, which sometimes isn't the case if birthdays are happening really regularly and children are bringing cakes home on a regular basis. So, right, great question here. Do packed lunches have to adhere to the guidelines when brought in by parents? I think my interpretation from the guidance is that yes, food brought in from home should also be meeting the guidance. And again, this is where I feel like that food policy comes into play. You can stipulate what you're doing in your menus, and that actually the government are hoping that food that's brought in from home is the same. There's also lots of questions about things like choking risk foods being brought in, foods that are inappropriate for ages, confectionery, allergens being brought in from home. And that's really hard to monitor for nurseries, isn't it? It's a really tricky, challenging thing. But again, if you can all go back to your food policy, have that all in detail on your food policy, so you can always highlight it to parents. Somebody did ask earlier, I think, about Ofsted, and if Ofsted are going to be judging a nursery based on the food that's being sent in. And I think, again, as long as you are doing what you can to try and make sure that parents understand what is and isn't appropriate, especially with things like allergens and choking risk foods, then you're showing that you are going, above and beyond to try and help that to happen. But of course, you're not always going to be able to control what every parent does.
And again, we've got a resource available on Zoo where we talk about packed lunches in like the new guidance. So have a look for that, or email the team and we can send something over to you.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, so we've also got a really good question here. Will Zebedees be changing to more starters and mains some days and not puddings?
So we've recently sent out a survey. And we've asked nurseries what their thoughts are, because that could be an option for us. So we're getting some feedback and we're just waiting to sort of analyse that and see what the outcomes are. But yes, it's something we're interested in looking at.
There's another question here as well. Will you be offering starter side for main courses?
Yeah, and again, we're going to look at the feedback, see what our nurseries want. At the end of the day, we've got to keep everybody happy. But it's a route we're exploring, yes.
Okay. Yeah. Someone says this: I started to look at cereals that are low sugar, Weetabix porridge, plain shredded wheat, the only ones I can find that are okay. Are there any others? Also, gluten-free options don't adhere to the traffic light system. Yeah, it's really tricky. Cereals are really tricky. There are more coming out at the moment in light of all of the government recommendations and changes that are looking a little bit better. But definitely Weetabix porridge, plain shredded wheat, puffed wheat is also another one that is really useful. And I can't think of any off the top of my head. I think there are some like cornflakes and Rice Krispies that are still low in sugar, but some of them have slightly higher salt, and it's really worth looking between brands. Sometimes the supermarket owned brands have much lower levels as well than the kind of main brands that you would recognise. It is very tricky with gluten-free options, and I completely agree with you. And I think this is where that statement from the government that you will follow the guidelines unless there is a very specific reason why you can't comes into effect. If you're offering gluten-free and you really cannot find a gluten-free option that is low in sugar, that is low in salt, that doesn't have nuts in it, it is a challenge. And there's always going to be concessions for things like that. So I think that you you can absolutely, have a little bit of leeway with things like that. It's just about trying to make sure that most of the options that are on offer are lower in salt and lower in sugar. But I actually think this is a really good one to do a little bit of a deep dive into. I have got a blog on low sugar cereals, but it's quite old now and I'm sure there's more. So I'll try and do a little deep dive into that myself. But the ones you listed plus puffed wheat, there's also some granolas that are low sugar as well, but quite often they contain nuts in. So, it's about kind of really searching around, but I'll try and do some research on that
We do offer some solutions for breakfast as well. Most nurseries provide their own breakfast, so it's not something that we send out a lot. But we've limited the cereals in there just to porridge oats and Weetabix, basically.
Okay, amazing. So you actually provide that solution.
And then we
That's
provide
really
dairy
good.
and fruit and bakery products.
Yeah, okay, love it. There's one here that says, if children are eating what they like at home, why do we need to be so strict at nursery? This is a great question. It really is. But again, I go back to that first slide where I talked about the fact that some children are having 90% of the meals at our settings. Our settings are a place of care, education, learning, growth, development, safety. We should be focusing on making sure that children within our settings have access to healthy, balanced food, especially those children who are not eating well at home. If you've got children who are not being given a healthy, balanced diet at home, their only opportunity to eat a healthy, balanced diet might be at nursery. And again, we are looking at reducing health inequalities, improving the diets of young children, making sure when they are in our care, they are being given appropriate health safety measures. It's like saying if little ones maybe at home aren't being looked after, well, we're still going to look after them at nursery. So I feel really strongly that as a place of education, somewhere where we are literally taking care of these children with our own hands and love and care, we really should be looking and making sure that the food that they are being offered is balanced, nutritionally beneficial, and will help them to develop and get everything they need. So I feel very strongly about that one. How about children who have medications? It's disgusting and parents like it to be diluted with cordial. Would this be something that would be okay according to the guidance? Well, I mean, all of these kind of individual situations, you might have some thoughts on this, but all of these individual situations will be on a case-by-case basis. When I was listening to Ofsted talking about this, they said every child is individual and every nursery setting and situation is also individual. So you're going to have to work with parents and, have these kind of things at your own discretion. Milk and water are the only things that young children need. If you are giving medication, some children will not take that medication without, you may need to, result to using something like a cordial. And I think in those kind of situations, then you might not be able to do anything other than that. But again, like the guidance says, you must meet these unless there are specific circumstances which allow you not to. And this might be a specific circumstance that allows you, that, means you can't. Again, food policy. Everything should be in that food policy. So, and discuss it with the parent on a case-by-case basis. But do you have any
I
thoughts?
think where a child's health is concerned, whether it be an allergen or an illness they're going through, they need medication, there will be some flexibility, I'm sure.
Okay, yeah. So someone said here as well, isn't moderation a better option? Won't being this strict make children more likely to go for sugar fat when they get an opportunity? So what we know from early years is that children like what they are familiar with and what they are used to. There is so much research around this. Familiarity leads to acceptance. So that means that the more children are familiar with a balanced diet, a variety of foods, the more they are likely to accept those as the norm. If children are very used to having lots of sugary foods, lots of sweet yogurts, lots of sweet breakfast cereals, cakes and biscuits, then that is going to be what they're familiar with. So they're going to really readily accept those, and they might oppose a menu that doesn't have that on it. However, as I said, familiarity, it takes time for children to get used to it. Also, yes, absolutely, moderation is so important. But if at nursery we're offering biscuits and sweet cereals and, sweet yogurts and ice creams and custards and cakes and all of those kind of things every single day, that's not moderation anymore. So if that's being offered really regularly, and then when children go home, they're also being offered those, it's not moderation anymore. That is why these changes. Now, it's not to say that you can't ever offer puddings to young children. This is just saying, trying to meet these guidance, think about the amount of salt, thinking about the amount of sugar, offering a balance and variety, making children getting everything they need. And again, young children, as I said, are eating too much in the way of added sugars at the moment. So it's really about trying to flip that on its head and improve the diet of young children. And one of the ways is via nursery. So, yeah. Are milk and water really the only drinks that can be offered? Can a sugar-free squash be given to children who don't like milk and water? Another really great question, and actually something I forgot to mention when I was talking about the guidance. Some of the guidelines now also recommend no sweeteners. It's something that's been recommended in baby food for a long time, and the Food Standards Agency recommend that young children don't have sweeteners in their food. There is now a specific guideline within the guidelines that says no sweeteners, and squashes will either come as sugary or sweeteners, so not recommended. Milk and water are the only drinks that are recommended on the new guidance. When will your menus change over?
So the new menu starts on the 13th of October, so our nurseries will be able to look at the new menu a couple of weeks beforehand. We'll publish that on the online ordering platform, and you'll get the full menu packs and menu cards for parents the week before. 13th of October.
Okay, and there's one, I'll let you answer this first because I know you do a lot of this on the phone to people, but what are your suggestions if children refuse to eat the healthy options that are on offer? I know you probably get that question a lot because your menus are so great.
Yeah, I think children are great when they're with their peers. What happens at home doesn't necessarily happen at nursery. And when they're with their peers, they tend to conform. They see other children eating what maybe they wouldn't normally have. And it may take a few attempts, but they do eventually.
Yeah.
But they'll enjoy the meal. We get a lot of parents emailing us saying their child struggles with food at home, but they eat really well at nursery. And I think that's kind of evidence of that when they're with their peers.
They do eat better.
And when there is another option, if this is what's being served and they're hungry, they will eat.
And it's also one of the reasons why it's really great that we're offering these multiple occasions. So it might be breakfast, then it might be snack, and then it might be a starter or a side or a main or a second, and then it might be a tea and another mid-afternoon snack and a tea. There's so many opportunities throughout the day for children to eat in nursery. So you're giving them lots of opportunity, and especially with like the Zebedees menu, there's so much variety on the menu that there's often going to be something there they like. And then it also comes back to what I always talk about, which is that familiarity. It might be when children first start, this is very different to them. They've not had these foods or these meals, but actually familiarity takes a little bit of time, and then children get used to these new foods. They get used to seeing other children eat them. And also if the staff can be on board, which again is something that I feel like the guideline doesn't talk enough about, but if you can get the staff coming and sitting and eating with the children, and the staff are going to be real role models for these young children. They're going to see you eating and they're going to want to be involved and want to eat it more. So the more that you can try and do that, the more that you can try and get, staff involved, build that familiarity, low pressure, encouragement, but low pressure, offering it regularly, multiple opportunities to eat. You'll find that children do pick up after a while, generally. And like you said, what they do at nursery is not always the same as what they might be doing at home. So there's one here. I worry if we have a mixture of starter, side and second course, children will become quite confused about what to expect, and it will cause frustration and distress for the children. It would be preferred to have only starter, side, second course if possible. I don't know what the last little bit means in that it would be preferred, but I think as a nursery, you can choose. But I totally agree with what you're saying. I think sometimes children might expect it being a certain way. I mean, what's your...
Well, I think if we're offering a starter or a second course and the nursery has the option to choose one or both, that will be up to the nursery what works best for their setting.
Yeah.
If they're choosing to mix and match, maybe some days have a yoghurt and fruit and another day to have more of a savoury option, you can still serve it as a second course. So the structure of the meal is the same. So the children will still be familiar. But I think it's very much up to the individual setting, what works for them.
Yeah, of course. Love that. Also, Jude, I love this comment. Someone has said, I think changes are great. I think it's really important not to highlight the changes to the children in a negative way. We could absolutely not agree with that more. Children pick up so much on our vibe. So if we're talking about food and we're saying, oh, we don't like that, or these changes, or, oh God, we've got new menus, and we highlight that to young children, it is going to impact their willingness to accept it. And to make your jobs easier in a nursery, you absolutely want to make sure that we are being positive around the food on offer, the menus, the smells, the look, the taste, everything about food, because it will make your job easier. If we're, like I say, if we're being negative about the menus, and if we're commenting on it being a bit challenging, or that you're not sure children are going to accept it, it's the same with children who are fussy. I always say, when parents talk about their children and they say, oh, they're really fussy, or they put a meal down and say, now I know you might not like this, instantly those children are going to go, okay, I'm not going to like this, and you'll have meal refusal, and that makes your job your job much harder, because you have more hangry children, you have more fussy eaters, you have more food refusal. So absolutely, Jude, thank you for saying that, because I totally agree. Really, really like that. Someone's mentioned as well, they get their parents to make a donation and cake baked by our chef, so dietary needs and allergy requirements are met. You could do that, but maybe we could focus on having a lower sugar recipe. I actually have some like banana bread, lower sugar recipes, and some in my books. And I'm sure Zebedees have got some recipes as well for lower sugar options that you could use as well, so that you're still meeting the guidance. I think we have had all of them. I think we've answered all your questions. Of course, if you have any more, please email us in. I'm happy to help answer some still, and Zebedees are always there answering your questions and offering that support. Please share this with any other settings or anyone who hasn't seen it. We're going to be popping it up on YouTube, so there will be access to it if you want to watch it back, if you want to send it to any colleagues. And as I said, as always, we're always there to answer your question.
Yeah, email the client services team at zebedees.co.uk if you've got any questions.
Thank you so much for your lovely comments. That's really, really kind. Thank you. Thanks, guys. I really, really hope you enjoyed that webinar. Thank you so much for coming along. If you have any questions about this or anything from Zebedees, please do get in touch with us via email. We are so happy to help.